We're here just to talk briefly about the levy, a topic that should be in everyone's heart and soul in this room and everyone in the production industry. We're just going to run through a couple of things, and we're going to open this up to questions in a panel situation, because this is a great start and a great forum to hear from you, not from me, but you can ask whatever questions you like, and we'll endeavour to answer them, Mr. Lloyd, to the best of our ability. But the levy itself, the foundation of our industry in what we do for marketing and research with Animal Health Australia and our residue service, was set in place in 2006. Now that was a little while ago, some 19 years. It did have a sessional review in 3 years later, in 2009, but the decision was made not to change the levy. And somehow as an industry we forgot to do that again, because the concept of those that put the levy in place and fought very hard, and some of them are in this room. I know Peter Hughes says it aged him, that process. You don't look any older than 50, mate, so couldn't have been too bad. But the process of the levy and what we do, our industry's changed so much since 2006. And we're sitting here today with something that hasn't been considered and it's got some unintended consequences as to where we are now. So we're going to work through that this afternoon. As I mentioned, the levy funds obviously go to Meat Livestock Australia for the marketing and research activities that they do, but also to Animal Health Australia and the National Residue Survey. Now, Cattle Australia's role in this is really, really simple. We're here to look after the interests of the levy payers and ensure that the focus of that levy spend is done to improve the profitability, productivity and sustainability of our industry. And those words are very important, and the order of those words are incredibly important. Because if we don't deal with matters and use the levy to focus on matters that increase the profitability of the levy payer, we are wasting our time. That's a very simple first assessment. We need the ability to enhance productivity, to hopefully feed the world and meet the global requirements and the domestic requirements that we do. And we all want to foster our sustainability efforts, but first of all, if we're not profitable, it's very, very hard to be sustainable or to be green if you're in the red. So we need to focus on where that money gets deployed and how it achieves outcomes. So a little summary of where the levy goes at the moment in regards to how it's broken up. With 13 cents going off to Animal Health Australia, 29 cents going to the residue testing process, and obviously the marketing at $3.66 and the R&D at 92. There's currently nothing that's allocated to the emergency animal disease response. There's no allocation at all or provision for that. And you can see on the screen there how that what that turns to in dollar terms for each of those sectors. So an interesting situation to compare what's happened since 2006 to today in regards to our industry. The value of our exports then and now, we've seen a very, very material increase of 400%, which is phenomenal. We've seen a change in the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator that's pretty material and obviously hits all of our pockets to the benefit when we see where it's at today. And obviously the change of the equivalent National Young Cattle Indicator. Importantly, the GVP, which is the gross value of production, is approaching $20 billion, or at and around $20 billion, as the Minister just mentioned. Now that's significant, because what goes and goes into the funding of our broader industry and what goes to our RDC, being MLA, is obviously the 0.5% GVP component that comes from our hard-earned industry, our investment, our taxation, and our government contribution to our industry. That today is just over $100 million, 102 million to be precise. And how we utilise that GVP cap into the future is going to be a big challenge for this room, and how we consider that as part of our broader levy structure and management moving forward. So let's put the inflation in place in the context of how things have happened since 2006. That what we've seen is essentially a cumulative 62% of inflation since on what a dollar was, or what a dollar bought you in theory in 2006 as to what a dollar buys you today. Unfortunately, the dairy industry hasn't benefited so much, and this is obviously a constant challenge that we've seen the price of a litre of milk, and this was not considering the push that was done by the supermarkets around the dollar milk campaign, but the branded litre of milk hasn't fared so well. It's gone from $1.75 to $2.10. Our diesel price has materially changed, and as everybody knows, the cost of a Land Cruiser has gone up nearly 300%. So there's a pretty significant situation here, and I don't think there's anyone in the room that would be still running a business model that they were, on a cost base that they were today in 2025 as to what it was 19 years ago. And that's what we as an industry are faced with, is the opportunity to address this and move forward. So the process is, the analysis will be, and first of all, Cattle Australia will take the responsibility of presenting the case for change to the industry and outlining what it is that we need to do and why. There'll be a very, very broad consultation process right across the country with producers explaining it. And just so that we avoid this, and I don't read any more headlines that misstate this, this is not about a predetermined increase. This is about the appropriate allocation of the levy and the utilisation and the best utilisation of the funds, including the GVP cap that comes in. Because the unintended consequence of where we've been is that nobody thought that we were never going to do a review since 2006. So one of the key things that there will be consultation about is that industry formally, every 3 years, doing an assessment as to whether the allocation of the levy and how it's allocated and split is appropriate. One of the big unintended consequences of what we have is the fixed dollar nature. If we would like to put more money to Animal Health Australia, we can't at the moment because there's no formal instrument to do that. If we'd like to extend what the residue service is doing to support our export industry, we can't do that either. If we'd like to put more money to marketing, can't do that either. So this is a chance to deal with unintended consequences. And that will be our responsibility to speak to you and everybody else in the industry and give them the opportunity to understand this. But this is not about setting the fact that the $5 levy automatically is going to increase. It's about providing what is the requirement and what's the outcome that the industry needs for this investment. Will spoke earlier, and there are challenges here, that there's an incredible amount of work that Cattle Australia does for this industry off a very moderate budget compared to the $20 billion industry that we are. If you want people to do more of this work and to fight for this and to engage on what is your future, well, that needs to be funded in some capacity. So there will be a discussion about that. There'll be an open discussion about what producers want to see as the representation as to how we will look forward and how we create that profitable, productive, sustainable future. Ultimately, at the conclusion of that, there'll be a report. And that report will make its way with a recommendation to the Minister and the Shadow Minister. And we will seek their support on how we move forward and how we move forward with a more sustainable structure, with a systemised review process that's applicable to the changes that's facing the industry. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to ask Mr. Lloyd to come up and join me. And I think Will's going to start asking questions. But this is your chance. Yeah, we'll grab some chairs, John. This is your chance to ask whatever questions you like.
Gentlemen, I might just cast your minds back to the last time we did this process. I mean, there has been a significant amount of concern that Cattle Australia has brought up this topic and said that we need to go down this pathway. And I think some of us remember the last time the levy was reviewed, and it was a contentious process to go through. I mean, Garry, do you think this is going to be smooth sailing, or are we going to have to strap ourselves in for some difficult times ahead?
Mate, we have the most intelligent members of the cattle industry, and I'm sure they'll understand the need of the importance of dealing with this stuff. We'll have a lot of people that'll seek to just target this as a simple issue of what it means in funding MLA, to be blunt. But the reality is we need a well-funded service provider. We need money that goes into domestic and export marketing. Those increased prices of beef didn't happen just by pure chance or luck. They happened because the work that's been done by MLA domestically and internationally, along with the processing sector in this space, has actually positioned our beef as a premium product around the world. And I don't make any excuse for the fact of the great work that's happened, and to be in the position that we are at the moment, where our beef is sought after in so many different markets, is just not a fluke. And that takes money to deal with that. And the return on that $3.66 is pretty significant. You should probably ask.
Well, I was going to ask John. John, you, with the many hats that you currently wear and the many hats that you've worn before, have been through levy review processes. I mean, what does the road ahead look like for you? How does MLA best prepare themselves for what's going to happen in the next 18 months?
Well, MLA continues to do what it does. The role of an RDC, it's a bit conflicted for us to be advocating for an increased levy. That's up to the industry to drive that, and we accept whatever the industry outcome's going to be. We advise and tell them what good models would look at, and we do the economic analysis and all that type of stuff. But, it is a rough road in all industries, and this is a very good industry compared to others I've been in, let me tell you. And it's a much more rational industry. But you still got to start with the basics. These levies are federal taxes, right? All taxes are bad until they're proven good, right? So that's our challenge. And I think over the years, looking at the investments that have been made, and MLA, and recognising that we're here in the grass-fed cattle side of things, but MLA is grass-fed cattle is probably about half. We've also got the sheep levy, we've got the mutton levy, lamb levy, mutton levy, goat levy, all these other things mixed up in it as well. But at the end of the day, you look at the type of work that MLA has done, and all the work that MLA does refers to the red meat plan, right? So we don't go off on a tangent. We serve the red meat plan. The red meat plan has been, I think, very good over the years, and has said basically concentrate on protecting the industry, biosecurity, food safety, animal welfare, traceability, all these things serve that process. But they also serve the process of opening up new markets, market access, and that's an easy thing to say. As you know, when you peel the layers back and the cost of market access, market maintenance, monitoring the compliance systems in market, those are all things done by MLA internationally. But if you also trace the prosperity of the industry over the last couple of years, it does correspond to opening up new markets internationally, and it also corresponds to fighting the fight domestically in terms of consumption, and also the ability to carry on our business as usual. And so I think as MLA, we've got to continually demonstrate that this tax that's being put on industry at industry's request, and some of the things Garry alluded to is the inflexibility of it, because every tax requires a single piece of legislation, and that's why it's so inflexible to do so. But this tax is spent to the benefit of industry well. And so our job is to try to demonstrate, not only to do it, but to demonstrate it's done. Yeah. And one last point is, I never thought I'd be sitting here saying that the curve has turned on domestic consumption of red meat. But the latest data now shows that. And it's being driven, domestic red meat consumption is on its way up again, and it's being driven by a particular class of consumer, that being 18 to 40-year-old women. And that type of investment takes years to show benefit.
I think that's right, and you touched on a really important point before about market maintenance in particular, and acknowledging that we don't have all of our service providers on stage today. We've got a couple who aren't here. Garry, could you maybe provide some illumination on the role of the NRS and just how integral that is to our maintaining our market access and maintaining the domestic confidence that we have in the beef industry?
How many people here, before I answer that question, how many people here actually know what the NRS is? So the National Residue Survey is the program that essentially underpins the testing of the meat inspection process, if you like, or the residue management process for all of our export markets. We actually don't have an export market without the NRS. It is incredible how many times I speak at events around the country these days and virtually nobody in the crowd knows what the NRS is or understands the importance of it, except when we talk about the price of beef. Because without that program, we don't have export markets. That's how important it is to us. It's really significant because we now go into more countries than we have in the previous years. Obviously, the testing program we have to do as part of those market access programs is considerable. And to think that we do that program today off the same cost base that we did in 2006 is somewhat insane to me. Because if we want to protect our industry, we have to have the flexibility to accommodate that and the ongoing requests that happen around the world to meet the highest standard of food safety that we do and the highest integrity, if you like, of meat product, which is why our product is sought after. And we talk about sought after around the world as a premium product. We talk about the US, and the US changes every decade from being a customer to a competitor. But the reality is they want our product in the market because they consider it just as safe as their own product. Now, that's a very, very luxurious position to be in. We're only in that position because of the NRS and because of what that allows us to do. So everybody should know and thank every single day the activities of what that contribution of our levy does, because it fundamentally underpins our pricing and the profitability of our industry.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask for microphones to go around, please. And if anyone's got any questions, please do raise your hand. I've got David Connolly down the front here. This will be fun. But yeah, if anyone else has got any questions, please do raise your hand and I'll try to get to you before we finish up.
Thanks, Will. David Connolly from Northern Territory. Easy question, not a Dorothy Dixer either. Given that I think I would be correct in saying that most of the cattle in Australia start off as grass-fed cattle, can you just give some qualifications and some comments around the levy that's paid by grain-fed cattle as a class of cattle sold and how this will affect them and the conversations you've got to have with that grain-fed association? Thanks.
Thank you, David. Well, actually what we're doing is trying to take all of the production sectors that work into, all the industries, if you like, that work into MLA as their RDC on a levy journey at the same time to make this more efficient. So it'll be a cattle industry review, not just a grass-fed industry review. It'll be a cattle levy review, I should say. How they allocate it is slightly different to the grass-fed sector. There are proportions within it. And I can't remember the exact proportions off the top of my head. Okay, so it's a higher amount. It's $1.50 to R&D because obviously they have one transaction, whereas within the grass-fed sector there's the opportunity for more transactions on a single animal that accumulates within that process. We're also openly engaging with and collaborating with the sheep industry and the goat industry to help them go on a journey that they've been trying to go on for some time also, but they couldn't afford. So by consolidating and doing this once and dealing with the legalities of or the components of the legislation and the costs around that once, we're hoping to make this a more cost-efficient process for the entire production industry, not just the cattle industry. And as the cattle industry, we get some benefit out of sharing some of that load and some of that cost also. So this is about a holistic review and really setting up that legislation so that it does have some sensible flexibility on how these 3-year reviews are done into the future. And I hope, and that doesn't mean that it has to change every time, and just because it doesn't change, what I hope we don't do is fall and say, oh, we're going to stop now, because you'll end up back in the same situation that we are. But it is a key issue that we're tackling, and as much as possible, we are taking the other sectors on the same journey.
Another question over there. Now, Josie?
Thanks, Will, Gary, John. Thanks, John, for raising the point. It is a tax, and we need to look at tax, and we need to look at efficiency. So, I have a lot of questions, but if I could maybe be generous and have two. So, the NRS, really interested to know in how much the agricultural pharmaceutical industry that obviously benefits from the sale, of pharmaceuticals to our industry, how much they contribute to the residue survey, and also likewise, given that a large portion of our product does actually go to the domestic market, is whether that there is any, from the food safety perspective, any funds that support this important food safety initiative from a government level, given the amount of cost recovery that we do see at a processor level. And secondly, if I could ask if the ability to undertake advocacy activities will, as part of the levy, will be addressed.
Well, the residue survey, I can't answer that question, and we'll try to find out for you about do other components of the value chain contribute to that. I'm not sure. When it comes to domestic, it would really come down to what the MRL requirements are. So we're not the same as everywhere else in the world. We do have, as we all know, we use chemicals and pharmaceuticals in Australia that may not be used elsewhere for our export markets. So it's really market specific. And if you treated Australia as a specific market, it will probably have a different residue survey requirement, because we have MRLs that are permitted or not permitted on different products. So I'm sure it will be different for domestic, but the other contributors I don't know the answer to. Levies for...
I don't think your point, Josie, is I don't think the actual sector selling the products is contributing at all, to be clear. What was the final question?
Levies for representation.
Levies for representation. Just a simple one, hey? Thank you, Josie. Look, the reality is we're going to put that out there and give it to the producers for choice. Because if you don't think that you should have an industry and you don't think you should have representation in your industry, representing a $20 billion industry, that currently the total budget of Cattle Australia is about $2.5 million. So if you want to do that calculation, it's a fraction of 0.1%. Now, when we think about how we invest and what we want to do to have our future, there wouldn't be anything else we do in our businesses that requires a greater focus than those that represent our interests for our entire industry, to have the social capital to keep doing what we need to do, to represent and manage the programs that we need to do to make producers aware of these matters. So absolutely, it'll be a topic of discussion. We're absolutely going to put it on the table to the producers out there about this issue. There are other precedents within the taxation system, if that's what we want to call it, where this happens in other industry. The pork industry does this at the moment. And we literally want to put this in the transparent hands of the levy payers and actually understand what they want from their industry. Because at the end of the day, this gets confused. And yes, there is an element of what we have to do that is always policy and advocacy. But the development of policy is not advocacy. And the reality is that the work that we need to do around alignment with governments and engagement around that to get the right things in policies for the industry to survive and be profitable and be productive and be sustainable are critically important. And that message will be put out there and engage with producers right around the country as we go through that process. I want to add one thing. The only groups that don't want us to tackle that issue are the groups that are fearing their survival and relevance in the industry. The reality is, if that's their reaction and that's their thought process, then they probably need to consider their relevance today, not through the levy process. Because if they're worried about Cattle Australia being more impactful by being better resourced, then you really need to ask, what are those groups actually doing for our industry? So I'll leave that for people to ponder.
James Fowles, Wiley Creek. John Garry, just quickly, in business there's generally three ways to make a quid. You cut costs, you sell more, or you get more margin. So from an MLA's point of view, which one of those can you afford to focus on to save us some money in regards to this process? And then the other question was, when this comes around for the producers, is there some relevance to where we're struggling now or perceived to be struggling with the residue survey? How far under budgeted are we? Or where do we think we need to be so that people have got a context of what they should be dealing with or voting on?
Well, hopefully, we can do all three, right? Cut costs are about efficiency programs, automation, these types of things. Sell more, I think it's an easy one to answer. Open up more markets, rekindle domestic demand, do all that type of thing. So sell more is easier to answer. Cut costs, I'm not the person who's going to answer that for you here. I'm just the chair. There are smarter people in our organisation who are going to tell you how to do that and how to invest in that. More margin is a bit more nuanced, I think. I'd probably look at something along the lines of, where's Russell somewhere in the audience, but Russell Lethbridge. There was an article written about what he's done up on his place, producing the same amount of beef off 30% less cows. And, I'm agnostic to whether he produces the same amount of beef off 30% less cows or has the same number of cows and produces 30% more beef. But that's about the margin side of things, I think, So I think it's nuanced. You've got to invest in all three. And I know this is sometimes difficult for people to swallow, but you've also got to invest downstream for margins that are not necessarily on farm. We talked about the Pacific Labour Scheme, for instance. Now, that's highly applicable to the meat processing sector. But if the meat processing sector doesn't get that, or it doesn't get automation, or it doesn't get efficiencies, and this is not levy money being spent, by the way, down there. This is non-levy money that we are capable of spending through the donor company. Then it certainly does flow back to the producer as well. So I think we've got to do all three at the same time.
One of the key considerations, though, is how we think about what the legislation allows us to use the GVP funding for. Because one of the areas where we can be more efficient is that at the moment, despite that our taxes and our components allow us to be eligible for around about $102 million a year in the GVP, we're currently only utilising 83 of that. So one of the efficiencies of this process is looking at how do we optimise the utilisation through the legislation of that $19 million that we currently can't fully utilise because of the structure of our levy. So that is one of the key things that is going to be up for consideration is how do we better use the money that's in the system at the moment, if you like, rather than necessarily simply adding more system and continuing to be inefficient in other areas. That does require us to openly consider and discuss with government what we put in the legislation and how we deal with that through that allocation. In actual fact, the unspent GVP amount exceeds the total grass-fed levy contribution in R&D. So that was on the screen there before.
So when Garry talks about the 100 million, the 100 million applies across all the industries, not just the cattle industry. So it's also the sheep industry. But structurally, it's difficult. So if, for instance, the $5, one simple thing in 2006, if that $5 levy and the equivalent levy in the lamb and the mutton industry, because they're effectively a per head levy, not quite the same, but effectively, had that been indexed, right, just a simple inflationary index put on it, there would be no $19 million unspent, right, inside MLA. But of course it's not indexed. The second challenge with that unspent money is that the structure inside the government, this is not a political issue, it's more of a structural issue inside government. We find out how much money up until now, find out how much money we had to spend 2 weeks before the end of the year. So they would then tell us in the second week of June, how much money we've got to spend, and that money, because it's already, all the levy money's already soaked up. So to spend that excess money, you've got to go and find a commercial co-investor out there, and that ain't going to happen in 2 weeks. Now, that particular problem has now been solved. We do get the budget, unfortunately, after we set our budget, but it's sort of sometime in August, so we can work it out from that point onwards. We're very conscious of that, and the other component of that, of course, is we're like Britney Spears' father, right? We're given custodianship of all the red meat GVP money that's applicable to AMPC in custodianship and to LiveCorp. And part of it is if we allocate an amount to AMPC, Australian Meat Processor Corporation, and they don't spend it, we don't have time to spend it in what we call donor company.
So the other part, just to quickly...
It's clunky.
The other part so obviously we need to make that complexity that you just heard simpler. That'd be a good challenge for this review. The final part, and your question about the actual funding for the residue service and what have you, the point is to actually have some flexibility in the allocation and how that is moved rather than having fixed dollar amounts, potentially having an ability to move that, and also deal with matters that we recently had to deal with, biosecurity matters, where we had no component within the levy structure to physically reallocate to deal with that matter. So part of the issue is not just the 4 things it's dealt with today, but what are the things that are coming at us tomorrow? And being sensible about how we structure that at least if you do it every 3 years formally, you have a chance to be looking forward and combating the issues, not getting to the point that you frankly have a shit fight, and then it takes you 2 years to go through the process to get organised to start fighting it. So that's the structure, I guess, and really the key part of the forward-looking allocation is to have some flexibility to be forward-looking and frankly act in the interest of the industry as quickly as we can, and not hide behind the excuse that we can't do it because the legislation doesn't allow us to. We just need to be better at putting that legislation in place.
Just got another question up here.
Hello, Lindsay Perry, a grass-fed beef enthusiast. I have a question. The last levy increased the marketing proportion to build, trade and marketing, which clearly it's done very successfully. Australia now is in a different position than it was in 2006 and has free trade agreements with many of our major export markets, including the US and Japan, and value of beef exports has increased something like 200%. R&D investment has declined over that same period in general, and given long research timelines, we're probably now seeing the commercial benefits of research done 10 to 20 years ago. In this environment, this modern environment, do we still need to allocate 74% of the grass-fed levy to marketing, or do we now need an increased proportion for R&D in the levy to ensure we remain competitive for the next 20 years?
It's a terrific question.
So thank you for that question, because it really does open up another discussion here. My observation is the immediate returns to industry, as opposed to investing in the industry future, are probably given to you by marketing and opening up new markets. And remember, once you've opened up new markets, that's just the start of the expenditure. And in particular, the type of work that MLA with industry and the meat exporters in particular do in market is what I call sticky marketing. We're embedded in supermarkets, we're embedded in the food service industry, as opposed to USMEF, who often are just there to do a deal and then walk away. So we're a sticky marketer in markets. And I think that allows us to really maximise the capabilities. Yes, you're correct. The R&D component has declined, but the R&D component of the levy has declined in a sense, but it's been supplanted by what we call donor company. So of that $100 million of Commonwealth taxpayer money that they give us, the levy across all the industries soaks up about 50 million of it. And remember, people use the term, the Commonwealth matches the levy dollar. The Commonwealth doesn't match the levy dollar. That's an MLA board policy. The way the Commonwealth money is given to us, the Commonwealth matches what MLA spends out the door, irrespective of where the money came from. Now, we're lucky that we're pump primed about 50% with levy money to trigger that Commonwealth money. But we've got another 50 million sitting there that we've got no way of getting from the Commonwealth, a la that 19 million, because we don't have someone else's money to trigger it. And that's what donor company's called. And donor company is exclusively an R&D corporation. And I'm not recommending this at all, but we could run the same size R&D program without any R&D levy. If you chose to shift everything into marketing, for instance, that's up to you guys, right? But we could run the same size R&D program with no R&D levy. It would subtly change though, because there's no R&D levy. What we've got to do is get an external co-investor to invest in things that they're interested in. And maybe that won't be potholes at the bottom of the industry driveway, and I say that with the greatest respect because they do need fixing, and that's often what the levy money does. So there's a challenge there, but there are opportunities.
The very point of your question will be question number one at every one of those consultation sessions, because this is about the forward look. The whole point is explaining the options, of which John's just done a very good job of explaining the holistic nature of it. That very point that you make is the very point that we'll be discussing with each of those producer consultation sessions, because the whole point is to be clear about where we want to be in the future, acknowledging the impact of what's happened in the past and where it's brought us. But that is the very, very issue that I suspect will be question number one.
Now, just in the interest of time, I think we'll do two more questions. Gentleman on the left over here.
Yeah, Cameron McIntyre. Garry, I don't know how to frame this question, but the fact of the matter is Cattle Council were just so underfunded for the last... We can talk all about what went wrong around, but Cattle Council didn't have the funds to oversee the activities of MLA. And there's quite... got to look back occasionally, but without getting into too much detail, there was a lot of... MLA at times lost relevance to the actual producers, and I'm sure a lot of people agree with that. I think the corner's well and truly turned, and I'm very proud of the way Cattle Australia are now democratically elected, and they're being so proactive and are doing such a great job. Can you ensure that if there's a levy increase, that you can Cattle Australia can get a bigger percentage of that money? David Littleproud just walked in. If we got this through in his time, he'd guaranteed that you could have. But Cattle Australia are the answer. They have got to have some more money to be able to advocate for us, and that's the other point I'm going to make. There's definitely a way. We copped a lot of flack all the way through that you couldn't advocate, and it can be done, as you acknowledged before, but are you pretty confident that you can get a bigger percentage of this money if the levy goes up for Cattle Australia?
Thank you, Cameron. What I'm confident about is that we will put up a very compelling case recommending to the levy payers why they should seek, through whatever form it takes, a component to increase the financial capacity of Cattle Australia. So this will be absolutely a discussion. I can't guarantee the answer because I don't control the vote. But it is my job to put up as compelling a case as I can to explain to people why it's in your interest to understand this and why it is, as an industry, we need to tackle these matters. There are, as I said, there's methodologies and there's precedents that allow this to happen. It's all about the intent and what this means. So we will be tackling this issue head on, is the scenario. At the end of the day, it'll be up to the levy-paying producers who vote on this to either support us or not. But we'll be taking up the fight. I will say very, very clearly that the collaborative relationship that we have today with the board, the chair, the managing director and his general managers at MLA is nothing short of exceptional. That is because we have engaged in meaningful dialogue, respectful dialogue. John certainly knows where I stand on issues and he lets me know where he stands on issues. But the reality is that what we've achieved over the past 2 years in collaboration with our service provider, MLA, has been an exceptional improvement to what it was in the years and decades prior to that. Now, that hasn't come by some sheer fluke. It's become through the commitment of people to actually face into this and look forward and act in the best interests of producers and collaborate. And the work that we now do with MLA in pre-planning, and we're doing, to give you an idea, we're actually already planning now and working with MLA about what's going to happen next financial year, and that's never happened before. So that probably gives you the greatest example of the cultural and attitudes change between both organisations and how we're approaching this issue to be more efficient, hopefully more effective, and really focus on those issues that where the levy is spent and where the other funding is spent is, again, I'm going to say this again, focused on the profitability, productivity and sustainability. It does come with having some pretty uncomfortable conversations, and I don't know how many times I've said this, but as a sector, and certainly as a Cattle Australia, as an organisation, the board, I say this often, get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, because the reality is that's how we need to engage with all parts of our industry, but also our consuming demographic that doesn't relate to what we do today in a production sense. There are generational separations now from the vast majority of our consumers who think they know what we do, but have no actual idea. And this is the work that we are doing around this, and this is the work that we talk about future levy states. That's one of the things it'll contemplate as a new year, a new concept. How do we deal with this issue of how we engage in the communication, the education, the process around the consumers of our product? And the work that we're doing with MLA is monumentally better in that, particularly over the last couple of years.
There's just one more question in the middle here.
Thank you. Loretta Carroll, one of the Regional Consultative Committee members. I think when you first started, Garry, you said this might be a 2-year process, this review. It's very concerning to me that you've got a budget of 2 million or 2.5 million. To me, that is absolutely unsatisfactory. We've got the residue issue and the animal health issue. It's my understanding that in the MOU that there is an opportunity to move some of that money around presently and may not require the consultation. Can we move this process a little bit quicker before you get tired and other industry people get tired? Like we, as you say, let's enjoy the difficult and get things happening pretty quick.
Well, Loretta, I'm always aspirational that whilst we put these long timeframes on it, our target is to do this in a more abbreviated time, being more effective. I'm not a believer of the fact that we just should say it's 18 months for the sake it's 18 months and take 2 years. I'm a believer that we should say it's 18 months and do it in a year if we can. So the focus here is really on us, and it's really on the engagement we get from producers. The Minister and the Assistant Minister is clearly shown their willingness to participate and assist and work with us on this issue. So government's not going to be the issue. The issue is going to be what we do as an industry. So we need to get progressive, we need to set a time frame, and we need to not use the excuse that we don't meet or exceed it. Now, that does mean running things a little harder and a little more commercially orientated than what things may have been done in the past. But that is the reality. We are in a very commercial industry, and I make no apologies for the aggressive approach that we're going to take to resolving this for the industry. Hopefully they support us at the end of it.
Can I just say, I've been CEO of two different versions of one research corporation for 9 years. I've been on the board of 2 other research corporations, and I'm now on the board and chair of MLA. If you say that quickly, it doesn't sound too bad, but it actually sounds like I'm institutionalised. But what I will say to you is that there is nothing worse than being in our position and having a lame duck representative organisation. There is nothing worse. Now, you know, we are bound by legislation very tightly as to what we can do and what is eligible. But in this whole process of considering what the funding should be for Cattle Australia, you know, do whatever you need to do to make sure you've got a good representative organisation, because I tell you what, it's hell when they're lame ducks.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We'll have these guys up again here in 2 years and we'll see if the words of Peter Hughes are correct and they've aged rapidly. But thank you very much for your time and thank you, everybody.